that election. What should we do now? But if we answer that question by just putting our blankets over our head every morning when we see a new tweet, we don't see change, we don't see action. And we have a tradition here right in this room, in the tradition of Reverend Sharpton, in the tradition of Reverend Jackson, in the tradition of Reverend Jones. We march and we say we are not just resisting, we are insisting on a better way forward. The next day after Donald Trump was sworn into office, millions of people peacefully marched across this country. Women, men, Black Lives Matter, people all over this country marched together. The day after that, 6,000 women signed up to run for office. And day 10, after that mean-spirited Muslim order, the anti-refugee order was put into place, people spontaneously showed up at airports across this country on a Saturday. Who does that? They did that because they were marching in your tradition. Then you move forward to my favorite march, day 100, the March for Science. And my favorite sign, what do we want? Science. When do we want it? After peer review. That was the March for Science, the March for Racial Justice to do something about climate change. Then you go forward into the summer when they tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and every single Democrat in the United States Senate turned and voted and were joined by 3 Republicans, and we defeated their effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act. We did that, and you did that. Then you go to the fall. You go to the fall where there are these legislative races in New Jersey and in Virginia. And my favorite one was the guy in New Jersey who the day of the Women's March said, I hope they'll be home in time to make dinner. Guess what happened that fall? He got defeated by a woman. Or in that incredible victory against racism and the victory for dignity and justice, Doug Jones won the Senate seat in the state of Alabama. That happened. That is the arc of justice that we are on. And then you go to the spring where those students marched from Parkland. And they didn't just give us their voices or their protests. They voted. And that is why just this last month, we passed universal background checks for this country, and we are moving with the Violence Against Women Act that closes the boyfriend loophole. That is what's happening right now in this country. So the march continues, and they say the arc of justice is long. Well, there are some really good welders in this room that have shortened it. So we ask you to keep marching with us. That is how we won in 2018, and that is how we will win in 2020. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Give a hand, Senator Amy Klobuchar. Several years ago, my friend, who was then governor of the state of New York, David Paterson, he and Congressman Greg Meeks and I are around the same age. We grew up together in public life. And he called me and said that he wanted to send someone to speak at the Saturday rally. As you know, for 28 years, every Saturday, we gather at the House of Justice and do a live on-air rally. And I said, well, okay. He said, can you make room for them? I said, yes. He said, all right, I'm sending you Congresswoman Gillibrand. I said, who is Congresswoman Gillibrand? He said, she serves in the northern part of the state. And I said, and why is she speaking? He said, you'll know that by Saturday. That Thursday, he announced that he had selected her to fill the seat of Hillary Clinton in the U.S. Senate. She came that Saturday, and I've had everyone from Mrs. Clinton to Barack Obama to you name them come on Saturday morning. But she did something that no one has ever did. She spoke for about 15 minutes, and then she said, now I'll take questions. I said, no, 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 you don't know my crowd. You don't want to do that. She said, no, and she stood there on live radio, hundreds of people there, thousands listening, and took every question. Ever since she's been in the Senate, she has been accessible to us. She never misses an event, an occasion, a birthday, but even more important, on policy. She calls us and checks in on issues. And she called me when she first thought about running. She called me and said she was going to go away with her family and talk about it. And she called me and said she was going to call Reverend Richardson to pray about it. And I don't know why she want to pray with me. I'm not going to take it personal. But I do want her to know I noticed that she says you're going to pray with Richardson. I don't know what kind of prayer y'all got, but he decided you was running, I guess. So I want to bring on this junior senator of New York, who's not a junior to anybody that knows her, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Let's make sure this works. Okay. Yeah, we're good. Thank you, Reverend, for your friendship, your leadership, your vision, your ability to gather us together, to be of one mind and one heart. Thank you to Reverend Richardson for his leadership, his drive, his vision, and tenacity. I feel blessed to be here at the Minister's Luncheon. 2 weeks ago, I officially launched my presidential campaign just a few blocks away in front of Trump International Hotel with a message that I believe in so strongly. When America joins together to reject hate and division, hope rises, fear loses, and brave wins. That rally was very much like this gathering. The power of these events is not in the politicians standing at the podium. It's in the brave people who show up every day to fight for our values, not just at rallies and marches, but every single day. People like Reverend Sharpton, who has never stopped fighting for social justice, and my dear friend Jennifer Jones Austin, who for more than 2 decades has never stopped fighting for underserved children and families because their fight is her fight. And of course, her late father, who we are honoring here today, Reverend William Augustus Jones, Jr., a man of God who sought to redeem the soul of America while spending his life advocating for poor families. That is brave. Bravery is the people in this room and the millions of Americans who have tirelessly spoke out against this administration's cruelty toward women, Muslims, the LGBTQ community, and families suffering and struggling, waiting at our border. The truth is, President Trump is tearing the moral fabric of this country apart. He demonizes the vulnerable. He punches down. He puts his name in bold on every building, and he does this because he wants us to believe that he is strong. He is not. Our president is a coward. Now that is not what we deserve. Americans like you are making a choice to resist the backward pull of this administration and pushing us towards a better future. We need a president who is worthy of your bravery. That is why I am running for president of the United States. We need to fight for an America where power truly belongs to the people, where our leaders care about everyone in this country and lead not from weakness of ego, but from strength of their character. I know we can be that America, but it means by starting at the root of our problems, which is greed. Right now, special interests are displacing the voices of the people of this country. Find me a so-called unsolvable problem, and I will point you to the greed and corruption standing in its way. Polluter profits take precedence over drinking water. Predatory lenders get special access to the White House and are allowed to take even more advantage of the vulnerable. The NRA stops popular, common sense gun reform while stray bullets kill children in our communities. And we have Lucy McBath here to stand up for our communities. Dark, unaccountable money is at the heart of this outrageous inaction. We need to crack open our government. Flip the switch. Let the light flood in. That's exactly what I did when I first came to Washington and challenged Congress by making my meetings, finances, earmark requests public. I called it the Sunlight Report. I was the first member of Congress to put all these things on my website, and it was not popular among my colleagues. They said the bar was too high for transparency. I rejected that notion, and I reject it now. The American people deserve to know that their elected leaders are working for them. It's why I wrote and passed the Stock Act in 2012 to make it illegal for members of Congress to line their own pockets and profit from insider information. Public servants should never enrich themselves in the offices that they hold. Perhaps our president needs a reminder. I will keep leading on transparency within my own office and campaign. It's why I'm not taking any corporate PAC money. It's why I have no federal lobbyist money and no individual super PAC. And it's why I was the first presidential candidate to release my 2018 taxes. I've put 12 years of tax returns online, going back to my very first year in public service. And as president, I will fight for publicly funded elections. I believe it's the closest thing we have to a silver bullet. I would change the way Washington works overnight. Our president should govern based on the principle that our democracy only works when our elected leaders hear directly from the people they represent, and that your voice is as loud as everyone else's. Only then, once we address the greed in Washington, can we finally start to make progress on the problems we face. But here's what I've also learned in the last several years. To take on the issues that matter most, you have to have a leader who is willing to be brave, a leader who is brave just like you. And I have learned that bravery means standing up to the powerful, summoning the courage to confront it head on. And that's why when I first ran for Congress in a 2-to-1 Republican district, nobody thought I could win, except, of course, for my mother. And that tells you a lot about my mother. People told me that district, it has more cows than Democrats. You just can't win it. But I took those long odds and I won. And the next election, I won again, that time with a 24-point margin. And why did I win? Because I've never forgotten who I serve. I stood up to greed, and I voted against the bank bailout twice. I stood up to corruption by making insider trading by members of Congress illegal. I stood up to bigotry and fought to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And it's why I am proud to stand up to Donald Trump and vote against his nominees more than anyone else in the U.S. Senate. So I will go toe-to-toe to do the right thing with anyone, whether it's powerful institutions, the president, or even my own party. We have big fights in front of us that we cannot afford to lose. And we can't possibly win if we aren't willing to speak out and speak up for what's right, regardless of who might be mad. I will not let anything get in our way of making sure that health care becomes a right in this country and not a privilege. We have to ensure that every kid gets a good public school education no matter what block they grow up on. We have to pass a national paid leave plan, and we must reach full employment in this country. At the same time, we have to dismantle the institutional racism that pervades our society and holds back millions of families. It's in our healthcare system, our education system, our economy and criminal justice systems. It's in the growing crisis of Black women's maternal mortality. It's in the sentencing disparities that keep Black men in prison for years while white-collar criminals go home on bail. It's in the wealth gap between Black and white communities that only widens from generation to generation. These challenges call for solutions both targeted and broad, like higher standards for maternal care, a national commitment to full employment and ending underemployment, postal banking so that more communities have access to capital, ending cash bail, legalizing marijuana. We must protect and expand our voting rights, get the dark money out of politics, and combat attacks on our democracy. From racist voter suppression to gerrymandering and foreign tampering in our elections. We know Stacey Abrams would be governor of Georgia today, but for disenfranchisement of voters. What happened there was outrageous. Every eligible voter should be automatically registered when they turn 18. We should have early voting in every state, a national holiday for Election Day, and every vote must be counted in our elections every single time. And before I close, I know that Reverend Sharpton has been asking every 2020 candidate about the issue of reparations. This is a conversation that is long overdue. So I want to let you know where I stand. I firmly support Congresswoman Jackson Lee's bill to create a commission to study reparations. As president, I would advocate to Congress to pass that bill, and I would sign that commission into law. This is the first step of acknowledging as a country that hundreds of years of slavery and institutional racism have caused mass inequity and harm to Black people and has held Black communities back for generations from achieving their full potential. And we must not only study the problem. It's not just the issues that I've already mentioned that we have to fix. We need specific answers to each of these problems. We have to also deal with affordable housing and redlining. We need environmental justice. We need to take on the racist city planning from the likes of Robert Moses. I pledge to take on all of these issues directly as president. None of these fights and equally big goals are going to be easy. Nothing that is worth fighting for ever is. But I've never backed down from a fight, and I certainly will not stop now. Our faith, Our faith tells us to care for the least among us. Our faith tells us to feed and clothe the poor. Our faith tells us to help the stranger, the sick, and the incarcerated. All of us here today are called to be the light of the world, not to be hid under a lamp, but to be on a hill, so that the world can see that light. We are called to be that light of the world, to take on the dark forces, to do what is right when it is hard, to put on our armor of God and go to battle for what is right. This is what we are called to do in this moment. And we will all look back on this day, and we will be asked, what did you do when you were asked? You will personally be asked, what did you do when hate reigned? What did you do when fear reigned? What battle did you take on, and who were you willing to stand up to? You will be asked, you will be called, and you must respond. That is our job as the faithful to fight this battle. As a candidate for President of the United States, I will not back down. I will not give in. When hope rises, fear loses, and brave wins.
My. Go ahead and preach that thing.
Preach. Just a little preaching in here.
I want to recognize John Miller from Denny's, who is a major sponsor for this event. God bless you, John. I want to make this important presentation of a second honoree. We're happy to have with us today our dear friend, Bishop Adam Jefferson Richardson, Jr. We're not related, we're just from the same plantation. Bishop Richardson is an extraordinary leader. He is the senior bishop of the AME Church, which makes him the head prelate of all AME churches across this country and in Africa. Bishop Jefferson Richardson has been an extraordinary advocate for social justice. He is leading the AME Church today to partner with social justice movements. The AME Church is aligned with the Conference of National Black Churches. It's a conference aligned with the National Action Network. We pointed to him because he represents the great tradition of Richard Allen. He represents the protest movement that began in the church and the AME first. And the AMEs held on to social justice as the mandate for their existence. And it is right that at this intersection, the National Action Network and the AME Church hold hands and move forward as we strengthen ourselves for the fight ahead. And it is our pleasure here, on behalf of our president and the board of directors, to honor this senior bishop. He is from Florida. From his current charge is Orlando, the islands. He is a gracious host of many activities throughout our community. Let us welcome today and honor Bishop Adam Jefferson Richardson, Jr. Thank you. Thank you, my namesake. On days like today, I'm not just Richardson, I'm a Richard son. And to Reverend Al Sharpton, thank you for your tremendous leadership. I think that deserves a hand. Reverend Jackson, good to see you, sir. And to members of the Jones family. And to a room full of people
committed to social justice. Congratulations to fellow honoree Dr. Lacey, and for an award that honors the memory of Dr. William Augustus Jones. I heard him preach, and his preachment were sermons that packed a double punch. Salvation, pow, and liberation, pow. It is the gospel that connects us. I stand as the senior bishop of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the 115th bishop in the line of succession since the election and consecration of Richard Allen, a church that claims a commitment to political, economic, and social justice. It is a commitment to salvation and liberation. On June the 17th, 2015, a racist walked into Mother Emanuel Church and killed the Reverend Clemente Pinckney and 8 members of that congregation, wounding 3 others and leaving a congregation wounded in its soul, and an entire denomination afflicted. But the black church also wounded. I was asked to write a litany, and I wrote a litany entitled, "And the Doors of the Church Are Still Open." The litany went viral. I Googled it a week or so later and saw that it had been opened in Malaysia and countries throughout Europe. I was amazed at that, but it showed just how committed the church is to social justice, not just among ourselves, but across the full spectrum, and reminded me of the definition of what one of our sainted heroes and theologians and sociologists defined about the church. C. Eric Lincoln put it like this: our pilgrimage in America was made less onerous because of our religion. Our religion was the organizing principle around which our life was structured. Our church was our school, our forum, our political arena, our art gallery, our conservatory of music. Yes. It was lyceum and gymnasium. It was sanctum sanctorum. It was our audience with God. It was our fellowship with man. It was the peculiar sustaining force that gave us the strength to endure when endurance gave no promise. And yet, it pushed us forward. Can I tell you this? In spite of all of that, here we are today, and the doors of the church are still open. Doctor. I can tell the stuff, Doc. He's doing that. Thank you, Bishop. You need a sermon,
Bishop. We need this little service. Need a little preaching in here today.
Yeah. We don't even have to say nothing after that. Give him a hand. Bishop Adam J. Richardson, Senior Bishop, AME Church. We're going to hear from two candidates, and Congresswoman Lucy McBath, who is here with us, a great honor, and Hakeem Jeffries. But first, one of the things that made movements work was that we would all work together. When Dr. King went into Birmingham, he worked there with the Birmingham movement led by Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth. When he went to Memphis, it was Reverend James Lawson who was leading the strike of those bus drivers. Then there was on and on. And we have been blessed for the last 5 years with a group of ministers that have come together that now are 100 strong, that have made impact and named impact. And they are an affiliate to Nash Action Network, and we are to them. Their founder and national president is on our national board. And we have stood together and will continue to stand together to fight for economic as well as civil rights, justice, and equality. I think sometimes we need to give our flowers to each other while we can smell them. And because of their undying commitment to the cause of the church being a social justice agent, and because of their undying unity they've demonstrated with National Action Network, I want to give this affiliate award to them in the person of their president, who's a master preacher and pastor and hooper and friend, who had a vision and who had the courage to make that vision come into reality. And we want to honor the president of Impact and Impact Organization, the pastor of Mount Nebo Baptist Church of Harlem, Reverend Johnny Green.
First, let me say thank you to Reverend Al Sharpton, who is my mentor extraordinaire, to my big brother in ministry and the chairman of the board of NAN, Dr. W. Franklin Richardson. I want to say Bishop Richardson, that if I wasn't preaching a series at my church and about 30 or 40 of my members wasn't in the audience today, I would preach Sunday. The doors of the church are still open.
Yes, sir.
Word got out a few years ago that Al and I were in the office at the House of Justice having a fight. And it's true, we were in the back room and we were fighting each other. Al was throwing blows like I'd never seen anybody throw. And I really didn't want to hit Al because he was so small. People didn't know why we were fighting, and the fight started because I said I looked like Al 20 years ago. And Al called me a liar and said, Green, I've never been that big. It's an honor. It's an honor and it's a privilege to be affiliated with NAN. Reverend Sharpton always talks about the importance of staying connected to your roots. And I want everyone to know unequivocally that my activism was birthed through National Action Network. I never shall forget the first day that Dr. Richardson introduced me to Reverend Sharpton when I was installed at Mount Nebo. Reverend Sharpton delivered the banquet message, and Reverend Richardson preached the installation sermon on that particular day, and it's something that will stay with me throughout the duration of my days. I'm committed to NAN. I'm committed to NAN. We work together. Dr. Sharpton, I think about how he talks about how Jesse, Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson, and he's here today. He followed Jesse with Breadbasket. We followed him. We followed him with National Action Network. We now have, after 5 years of mobilizing, over 500 churches in our organization statewide. We want everyone to know that when Reverend Al calls us to join him on the front lines to fight against injustice, we are there. Also standing with me, I never would be able to do what I'm doing as leader of Impact without a strong core leadership. Our chairman of the board is also president of Empire Baptist Convention, Dr. Carl Washington. Can we give him a hand? Dr. Patrick Young, our General Secretary and Treasurer. Bishop Mitchell Taylor, Vice President of Economic Development. And Vice President of our Education, Dr. Frederick Crawford. Thank you, Al, for this honor. It's an honor to work with you, and we look forward to doing some great things together in this city, in this state.
Thank you. And I never was that big. I was big, though. Give him a hand, Reverend Johnny Green. He is a man that does not mind standing up for working class people. He's a man that has no problem shaking up the status quo even in his own party. And he's embarking on this race for President of the United States. He has visited me at NAN and we've talked at length. And he is not progressive in title. He is progressive and practical in action. And I want you to hear him on his first day of campaigning for President of the United States from the state of Ohio, Congressman Tim Ryan.
Thanks, Rev. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Great to be with Senator KLOBUCHAR and Senator Gillibrand and our new colleague, Representative McBath. I gave her a promotion already. And Congressman Jeffries, I don't know if he's here yet, but before I was running for president, Congressman Jeffries would say, "You getting in? You going to get in?" And I'd say, "Buy low, sell high, man. Buy low, sell high." So when he gets here and you see him, you say, "Congressman Ryan said, buy low, sell high." I want to just tell you a little bit about who I am and where I come from. My name is Tim Ryan. I come from Northeast Ohio. I represent very gritty industrial towns like Youngstown, Ohio, and Akron, Ohio. And I will tell you, I grew up in a town where we didn't know a whole lot of black people. I grew up in an Irish-Italian family, Catholic school. And when I got elected to Congress and ran, I represent the city of Youngstown. And the city of Youngstown is 50% African American. And the number one lesson that I learned is how much I did not know about the experiences of people of color in a community that was not that far from my own. And I set upon my own personal journey to try to understand and to try to listen. And a story that I learned over the years that illustrates a little bit about why we are where we are today. And it's a story of a rebellion that happened in 1676. It's called Bacon's Rebellion. You may have heard of it. And prior to Bacon's Rebellion, the British landlords who had all of the wealth and all of the power had divided up the society. And it was the rich and it was the poor. And that happened for so long and became so untenable that all the poor people got upset and they had Bacon's Rebellion. They didn't quite pull it off. So the idea from the British landlords on how to prevent that from ever happening again, all the poor people getting together and threatening the system, threatening the oligarchs, was we're going to divide people by race. Black, white, brown. And we're going to keep them divided. And we're going to pass laws in colonial Virginia in the 17th century that kept us divided. And that led to slavery and then Jim Crow and all the rest. And here we are today. How many years later? Still suffering from being divided in the 17th century. Still experiencing structural racism in our criminal justice system, in our education system, in our economic system. And there are leaders today that throw gasoline on the fires of division and use every opportunity to keep all of us divided. Because when we come together, when we unite, we are a threat to the most powerful and the wealthy. And so our job and my job running to be President of the United States is to make sure that we bring this country together. We unite this country so we can solve the problems that are facing all people in our country. And I will say that the economic system today is not serving many, many people in our country. I want you to look at venture capital, the big, powerful money that will scale up business, that will create jobs. 80% of that money goes to 3 states, California, New York, and Massachusetts. 9% of it goes to women, and less than 2% go to people of color. Less than 2%. And what I'm saying we need to do is not say we just need some centralized program in Washington, D.C. that's going to solve all of our problems, but that we come together and recognize that we need a new and better government, we need a new and better private sector, we need a new and better workforce, we need a new and better criminal justice system, and then together we can rebuild and forge the new kind of politics we want in the United States of America. They try to pit the workers against each other. I see this all the time. Who's the white worker, who's the black worker, and the black worker and the white worker shouldn't be working together, and the black worker and the brown worker and the brown worker and the white worker and immigrants. Divide, 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 divide. And meanwhile, our problems don't get solved. I will be offering in the next coming weeks an urban Marshall Plan in which we rehabilitate and reinvest into the urban cores in the United States of America. We clean up our towns. We get rid of blight. We get rid of lead paint in the homes that affects our kids' ability to learn. We make sure that there's not lead in the pipes. We make sure that teachers who teach our kids in the inner city get a pay raise. We have so many communities around here where there hasn't been a pay raise for a teacher in 9 or 10 years. We have a lot of work to do, but we can't let the powers that be continue to divide us. And I will give you one quick example about what we can do to rebuild and reinvest in our communities if we have the proper leadership. When you look at the future, you look at the future industries, like electric vehicles, for example. I represent a town that just lost 1,700 jobs to a General Motors facility. What's the future? I don't want a president of the United States that's going to yell at somebody, tweet at somebody. I want a president who's going to pull us together, put a plan together for us, and show us how you're going to help improve our lives. And I believe there are opportunities in the economy today like electric vehicles. There are 2 million electric vehicles today. By 2030, there's going to be 30 million electric vehicles made somewhere in the world. I want those vehicles to be made in the United States. I want them to be made in communities that have seen distress. I want people of color to make them. I remember when I first started going to politics and getting into politics, one of the first meetings I went to, Rev, was an A. Philip Randolph chapter in Youngstown, Ohio. Because we can't be the party of either we're for identity politics or we're for the economy. We are not the party of or. We are the party of and. We are the party of addition. And we need to bring everybody together to solve these big problems that we have in the United States. And I took a bunch of venture capitalists on a tour in a bus, rich people from Silicon Valley. And we brought them to Youngstown, we brought them to Akron, we brought them to Detroit, we brought them to Flint, and we brought them to South Bend, Indiana. And we said, we have ideas too in our communities. You have the money, we have the ideas. And if we're going to rebuild the United States, it needs to be in these communities too that have been unplugged for 40 years. We need that investment in Youngstown, Ohio, and in communities of color, because there's no way we're going to be able to move forward if we stay divided. Periodically, I'll go on a visit through Youngstown or Akron, and I'll have one of the local councilmen or councilwomen take me around. And a few months back, I went into the toughest part of the city of Youngstown, and the toughest neighborhood. We have an opiate crisis and crime and all the rest. And Julius, who was the councilman, he said, hey, you got to go meet Mrs. Duke. So we pull into the driveway, and here comes Mrs. Duke. She was out pulling weeds out of the cracks in the driveway. And she was surprised to see me, you know, Congressman just showing up at her door. And it was hot, and it was in the summertime. And her son comes around the back of the house when I got there. He had paint on his arm, and he had a little spray bottle. He was spraying for ants. And the house was beautiful, but all the houses around her home were dilapidated. The grass was growing. It's a tough neighborhood. And so I go into her house, and it's immaculate. There's a beautiful marble mantel. Everything is in place. It's clean. And she starts telling me how she can't go drink a cold glass of water on the porch once it gets dark because the neighborhood is so tough. And her husband worked for the sheriff's department and had a good retirement. And he passed away a few years before. And she said, I asked my son, how do we get out of this neighborhood? Maybe we should try to sell the house. And so her son looked into how much they could sell the house for. Number came back. $4,000. Mrs. Duke could sell her house in Youngstown for $4,000. This woman is trapped in a neighborhood that is unsafe. She and her husband have done everything right. They worked hard, they played by the rules, and yet our country has let her down. Our society has let her down, and all of the Mrs. Dukes around the United States. And I'm pledging to you, as your president, that I will make sure every day that I walk into the Oval Office that Mrs. Duke will not just be on my mind, she'll be in my heart. And we are going to conduct business in a way that is not a quick fix. We don't need a superstar. We need someone who's going to roll up their sleeves and get to work and get the job done for Mrs. Duke and everyone else around the country. I pledge that to you. That is my commitment to you, to join you in all of your hard work. And I will end with a story about Muhammad Ali. Because you can't give a good political speech a day after you announce you're president without talking about Muhammad Ali. So Ali was walking down the street, I think it was in Kentucky, and someone walks up to him and says, "Champ, I saw one of your fights." And he said, "Oh, no kidding." He said, "Yeah, I saw you got knocked down, and you know, it was unbelievable. I was a kid." And Champ said, "Wasn't me." He said, "No, I swear to God, it was the greatest moment of my life. I was there, and you fought. I mean, you got knocked down, but, you know, it was, like, great. And then my dad took me to the fight." And he said, "Wasn't my fight." He said, "No, Champ, it was your fight. I mean, you got knocked down, but it was your fight." Champ says, "I ain't never been knocked down." He said, "I'm either up or I'm getting up. And I'm telling you that the United States is never knocked down. We're either up or we're getting up. Communities of color are never knocked down. We're either up or we're getting up. The workers in America are never knocked down. They're either up or they're getting up." My name is Tim Ryan. I'm running for President of the United States. I want your vote. Thank you so much.
All right. Johnny, we got that. Doors of the church is open, up or getting up. You know, Johnny and I go on the road, we can use some. Presentation, and we need to know about what he does. I'm going to have them come forward quickly.
Hello, all. How are you today? Good. God is good all the time. My name is Cedric King. I'm representing a company, home-based company out of New York called Azad Watches. This is Mr. Bruce Miller as well from Blue Light Media. And today I'm here to present the Reverend a watch from Azad Watches. It's called the Azad Classic Edition, and Azad means freedom. So what better person than to represent this watch than Mr. Sharpton?
Thank you. We'll post this. Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Thank you. Appreciate you. Give him a hand, Azad watch. Talking about presentation. Dominique, bring up my presentation. I want the ministers before I bring on Senator Booker to give greetings, then he's going to speak at the plenary. He's not going to do his main sermon in here because y'all know he could preach. But he wanted to come and say hello to the ministers, and then Congresswoman McBath is going to speak in our plenary session on gun violence, starting in a few minutes across. But 3 months ago, God blessed me with my first grandchild. This is Marcus Al Sharpton Bright. He actually woke up and said hello to the senator. I don't know what that means. All right. Oh. He's been here all week, but the ministers was the only place I brought him up. I wanted my fellow yokemen to pray for my grandson. Let us hear some greetings from the senator from New Jersey, candidate for president. He will give his major address across at our plenary session. I'm asking everyone to stay and go over there so you can hear him and Congresswoman McBath. But let us hear Senator Cory Booker.
Hello, everyone. It is good to be here. I want to give greetings to Dr. Richardson, the chairman of NAN. I want to let y'all know I got to give greetings to my minister who is in this room, Dr. David Jefferson, who's here. I want to give my gratitude to I see a lot of New Jersey pastors here that have been very influential in my life and my career. And I want to give greetings, of course, to the Reverend Al Sharpton. Reverend Al is right. I will have a chance to speak about really important issues and policy over there, but I just want to stand here and let you know that this gathering of clergy is critically important not just because of now and where we must go, but we must recognize that we are here, not just as a black community, but because of an American community, because all of the progress we've seen, from the labor movement to the suffrage movement to the civil rights movement, has come through the black church. My family history is steeped in the black church, from family members who were ministers and deacons and choir directors to my mama who taught Sunday school in a small black church in New Jersey. We have come this far by faith. And at this time more than ever, we must recognize that we are in a moral moment. I'll be speaking to policy, but we are in a moral crisis when we have a nation that has children in millions of our kids in jurisdictions, thousands of them in our nation, where they can more easily find unleaded gasoline than unleaded water. We are at a moral crisis in this country when we have a criminal justice system that treats you better, as my friend Brian Stevenson says, when you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. We have a moral crisis in this country when large corporations are able to privatize their profits but push the cost onto communities, like I saw in places like Duplin County, North Carolina, where African American community is surrounded by industrial agriculture, Smithfield, international companies, in this case a Chinese one, that is literally poisoning their soil and their water with these massive concentrated animal feeding operations. Where I stood in a black church as folks told me that they couldn't open their windows or run their air conditioning or put their clothing on lines because of what's happening to them. This is a moral moment in our country, and that's why I was so happy that I could speak a little bit before I go in there and put my senatorial hat on, but put the hat on of a boy that grew up in a black church, and just say to you that this is not a political season. This election is going to come and go. We have a moral movement that we must create. And I still believe that faith without works is dead. I still believe that when we come together, there is power, because the Lord has told us whenever 2 or 3 are gathered together in his name, he is in the midst. This is a moral moment. And I know that we have power. We are told, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray. So I want you all to know where I am and what motivates me every single day, because I have spent my entire career not looking for the lofty areas to live. I have tried to find the calling of my country. When I grew up in New Jersey, as soon as I got my degrees, and my daddy wasn't satisfied, he's like, boy, you got more degrees in the month of July, but you ain't hot. Life ain't about the degrees you get, it's about the service you give. And so I joined my brothers and sisters in the Central Ward of Newark, New Jersey, where I've lived for decades now. No matter what title I have held, from senator to lawyer, I have lived in my community. A community folks have turned their back on, a community that folks look down upon, and I joined that community in struggle. I'm the only person right now in the United States Senate that lives in a black and brown community that is below the poverty line. Median income where I live is $14,000 per household. But we are a proud community that takes on fights. And I always say I got my BA from Stanford, but my PhD on the streets of Newark. From folk who are fighting and winning battles. Some of them here are in this room. And so I just want to leave with a spiritual message of crisis for me. You know, we have shootings still. Even though my mayor, Ras Baraka, is driving down shootings, we still have too many kids that are killed. I chose to live. I live about 100 yards from there now, but I chose to live for almost a decade in high-rise, what became public housing projects. I moved into those buildings in 1998, lived there until 2006. And this community, the buildings were dilapidated, no heat, no hot water, roaches, mice, all kind of challenges, a slumlord that we eventually got to go to federal court for his crimes. but the community was spiritually strong. We stood by each other. And there were some boys that grew up in that community. I watched them grow up. But one night I was coming home, and I smelled something in that lobby of my building that I hadn't smelled that strong since I was at Stanford. It was marijuana. But you all know that black boys in inner cities do not have the same margin for error or experimentation as privileged people at our universities. There is no difference between blacks and whites for using marijuana, selling marijuana, but if you're black, almost 4 times more likely to be arrested for it and to get a lifetime sentence. Well, I knew I got to intervene with these boys, so I started talking to them, spending more time in the lobby, but I'll tell you what, I got busy. I was running for mayor. I'm embarrassed to tell you, I got busy. I did some things with them. I asked them, let's go to the movies. I shouldn't have let them pick the movie because they picked a movie called, oh, it was terrible, called Saw. Some of y'all might know. It took about 2 days, but I got too busy because I was running for office. I still spent some time with the kids, but I couldn't follow up on all the mentorship that I wanted to do with them because I was running for mayor. I thought in the back of my mind, hey, if I become the mayor of the city, I can help all kids. But God had put these children right in front of me, and one of them reminded me just like my daddy, who was born poor to a single mom in the South, just like this boy named Hassan Washington. And he was so much like my father, he had the same wit and the same humor. Now, my dad, mama couldn't take care of him, his grandmama raised him. This boy was being raised by his grandmother. You all know in our communities, many of our children are being raised by their grandparents. My dad's grandmother couldn't take care of him. He was taken in by a community. The black church saved him, gave him money to go to college. The community was there. I tried to be there for Hassan, but I got busy. I got elected president. Excuse me, I'm projecting. Maybe that was a thunderbolt of prophecy, I don't know. Maybe that was a little prophecy. I got elected mayor of the city. And in the first month, I was called to a scene of a shooting. One body covered, one body being put in the back of an ambulance, rushed to the hospital. And I attended to the people in the community. It was right in front of Pastors, right in front of 1 Court Street. And I barely gave attention to the humanity killed on the street because I was too busy trying to minister to the living. Telling them that we would not let this happen in our city, that we were going to stand up, talking to senior citizens about our plans. And then this is what happened. I go home that night trying to steal a few hours of sleep. I'm a newly elected mayor. And I'm looking through my BlackBerry and I see the report from the homicide. The name was seared into my eyes because the name on my BlackBerry was Hassan Washington. God had put him right in front of me. When I went to his funeral, Pastor was at Perry's funeral home. And the pastor and I know Perry's well. It's right down the street from my church, Pastor Jefferson. Pastor Carter, you know this. There's all on 1 floor except for 1 basement room. And Hassan's body was laid out there, and I didn't like this room. He has narrow staircases going down. You feel like you're descending into the bowel of a ship. And there we were, chained together in grief, people moaning and groaning, swaying on each other. And I was the newly elected mayor of the state's largest city, and I felt such shame in my heart as we gathered together for an American tradition. Black men in America are 6% of all the people, but we make up over half of all the homicide victims. And I stood in the back, and I was hurting inside. I felt shame. Other people were looking to me for strength. I was the mayor of the city, but I had none to give. And I'm telling you the truth because I couldn't stay. I ran out of that funeral home, got into my new SUV, drove down to City Hall, ran into my new palatial office, slammed the door shut, and for the first time as a mayor, I sat on my couch and I wept. Here we were, gathered together in that funeral, all of us showing up, packed. We were all there for his death, but where were we for that boy's life? How can we have come so far as a people when we used to be lynched and beaten, terrorized. And now we have the leading cause of death of our children right now is homicide. But I tell you what I leaned on in that moment, what got me off of that couch, which brought me back to the understanding that weeping may endure through the night. It was the words of my tenant leader in the projects, a woman named Miss Virginia Jones. We named a street after her in that neighborhood. She had her son in the 80s murdered in the lobby of the buildings I moved into. And she never gave up. She never took her hands off the plow. She never moved out of the neighborhood in which her son was slain. Every day she got up. I once asked her why she stayed, and she looked at me indignantly and she said, "Why do I stay here? Because I'm in charge of Homeland Security." She didn't wait for a title. She didn't wait for a presidential appointment. She didn't need to be a cabinet member. She knew that change in our communities always comes from the grassroots up. And I want to leave you with what she said to me, a man broken from the death of another child. When I was giving in to the seduction of despair, when I was losing my way and felt darkness swallowing my soul, I got up early in the morning, came down in the elevators of brick towers, came out into the courtyard, and these were the words, because I see her across the courtyard. With her back turned towards me, I feel like I am 100 feet underwater. And this woman, almost as she hears me screaming, she was 5 feet and a smidgen tall, but she turns around and she sees this man before her across the courtyard hurting. And she does the only thing I needed at that moment, was she opened her arms. Now, I'm a 6'3" former tight end from Stanford University, but I ran into her arms like a little boy. And this small woman hugged me and held me and rubbed my back. And she gave me words that I leaned on all throughout my time as mayor. I leaned on during my toughest days, and I leaned on them in my good days too. The words I repeat to myself in the United States Senate when I feel like I am banging my head against an implacable wall of resistance. The words I'm saying to myself now as a presidential candidate, because this is a long slog and there are discouraging days. And what does she say to me? The two words as she rubbed my back, holding me as I began to cry in her shoulder over the death of another boy. She said these two things to me over and over again. She said, "Stay faithful, stay faithful, stay faithful." I say this to this community right now. We are facing tough days where they're rolling back civil rights, tough days where they're rolling back voting rights, tough days where the black-white wealth gap has grown over my lifetime. These are tough days. But we as a people who have come this far by faith, we must stay faithful. We must stay faithful because if we have faith the size of a mustard seed, we know we can move mountains. We must stay faithful because we know it's faith that has brought us up the rough side of the mountain. We must stay faithful because it has been the faith of our weary years, the faith of our ancestors' tears that has brought us thus far on the way. And I know that there may be tough days before us, but American history and black history in particular is a perpetual testimony to the achievement of the impossible. And now is the time that we put our faith in the Lord, because he has showed us that impossible things can be made possible. He has taught us that I can do all things through Christ who strengtheneth me. And with faith, we will go ahead. With faith, we will make this a just nation. With faith, justice will roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you.
Beloved, let's thank Senator Booker. Let me give you a couple of instructions. Next door, where we had the other candidates, is where Reverend Jackson will speak to open us up for the Black Church panel for 2020 and how we can protect the vote and mobilize our community. And then after that, across the hall will be U.S. Representative Lucy McBath. So if you start moving now, moving quickly, we'll meet you next door for the Black Church panel and across the hall for Congresswoman Lucy McBath. Let's move and move quickly.